King's guard told him, once she told him twice hands of the reins. Sir Alaric, a loyal member of the king's guard, walked through the corridors with purpose. He was a man of few words, known for his strength and unwavering loyalty to King Edric, but there was something different in the air this evening, a heaviness he couldn't shake off. Alaric had served in the king's guard for over a decade, and in that time he had witnessed the kingdom's many victories and defeats. He had fought in battles, stood watch over the royal family, and protected the castle from every conceivable threat. But nothing could prepare him for the conversation that would take place that night. It was a conversation that would change everything. He had just finished his usual evening patrol when he noticed a figure standing by the large oak doors of the castle garden. It was Princess Elira, the only child of King Edric. She was standing alone, her face pale in the fading light. For a moment, Alaric hesitated. He was used to the princess being surrounded by guards, courtiers, and nobles, but now she was here, in a secluded part of the castle, seemingly waiting for someone. And that someone was him. "Sir Alaric," she called, her voice soft but steady, as if she had been waiting for him to arrive. Alaric's eyes narrowed with concern. It wasn't often that the princess sought him out without a reason, let alone in such an unusual place. He approached cautiously, bowing his head in respect. "Your Highness," he said, his voice low, "is everything well?" Elira didn't respond immediately. Instead, she gazed out at the lush garden, where the flowers were beginning to close for the night. There was something about the princess's expression that made Alaric uneasy. He had known her since she was a child, and over the years, he had grown to respect her not just as royalty, but as a person. She was strong, intelligent, and wise beyond her years, qualities that made her a natural leader. But tonight, she seemed distant, lost in thought. Finally, she spoke. "There are things happening in this kingdom that no one is talking about," she said quietly. Her words hung in the air like a heavy fog. Alaric's brow furrowed. He had heard rumors in the castle, whispers of unrest among the royal council and among the nobles, but nothing that seemed to warrant concern. The kingdom was at peace, or so it seemed. "What do you mean, Your Highness?" he asked, his voice cautious. Elira turned to face him, her eyes wide and filled with worry. "There is a darkness in this court, Alaric. I can feel it. The counselors are growing bolder, and there are those who want more than just power. They want control, they want to take the throne." She paused, her voice trembling slightly. "My father, he doesn't see it. He is too blind to the danger. But I can see it. There is a rebellion stirring in the shadows, and it's only a matter of time before it reaches our doorstep." Alaric's heart skipped a beat. Rebellion. The word seemed almost impossible to believe. King Edric had ruled for nearly 30 years, and the kingdom had always known peace under his reign. But what Elira was saying sounded too real, too urgent to ignore. He had always trusted her instincts. She had been trained in politics and diplomacy from a young age, learning the delicate balance of power within the court. If she said there was danger, Alaric knew it was something he had to take seriously. "What can be done?" Alaric asked, his voice steady, though his mind was racing. The princess took a deep breath as though summoning the strength to speak the next words. "I don't know yet, but I need you, Alaric. I need you to watch my father closely, to listen to the council's every word. They are poisoning his mind, convincing him that he is invincible, that no one would dare challenge him. But there are whispers, and these whispers will soon become roars. I fear that soon it will be too late to stop them." Alaric looked at her, studying her face. There was no doubt in her eyes she was not exaggerating. She was speaking the truth that no one else was brave enough to face. He had always believed that the king's guard existed to protect the crown, to defend the monarchy at all costs. But now, standing here in the garden with the princess, Alaric realized that his duty had changed. It was no longer just about protecting the king. It was about protecting the future of the kingdom itself. "How can I help, Your Highness?" Alaric asked, his voice firm. He had already made up his mind. Whatever the danger, he would stand by the princess. He would not let the kingdom fall into chaos. Alira hesitated before reaching into her pocket and pulling out a small silver ring. It was a simple piece of jewelry, but there was something significant about it. She placed it gently into Alaric's hand, her fingers lingering on his for a moment. "This ring," she said quietly, "is a symbol of trust. If you wear it, you will be my protector, my eyes in the court. Keep it close and remember that it is not just a ring, it's a promise. Promise me, Alaric, that you will not allow this kingdom to fall into the hands of traitors." Alaric closed his fingers around the ring, feeling the weight of her words. The promise she had asked of him was no small one. It was a promise that would require him to make difficult choices, to stand against powerful men, and to risk everything he had ever known. But he had no doubt that the princess was right. The kingdom was at a crossroads, and the path ahead was uncertain. "I promise," Alaric said, his voice unwavering. "I will do whatever it takes to protect you and to protect Eldoria." Alira nodded, her face showing a rare moment of relief. "Thank you, Alaric. I knew I could count on you." She stepped back, her eyes lingering on him for a moment longer before she turned and walked back into the castle, her footsteps echoing in the stillness of the evening. As Alaric watched her disappear into the shadows, he couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. The weight of the princess's words pressed heavily on his chest. He had taken an oath to protect the king, but now he had to decide where his true loyalty lay. The king's reign was faltering, and the kingdom was teetering on the edge of something dark and dangerous. Sir Alaric had always been a knight of honor, but now he faced a challenge greater than any battle he had fought before. With the silver ring clutched tightly in his hand, Alaric made a silent vow to himself. He would protect the princess, and he would uncover the truth behind the rebellion, even if it meant going against the very people he had sworn to serve. The path ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain. Alaric had just stepped into a new chapter of his life, one where the fate of the kingdom and the future of Eldoria was now in his hands. The days following his conversation with Princess Alira felt like a storm was quietly building in the distance. Sir Alaric had always been a man of action, someone who didn't waste time with rumors or idle gossip. But now, as he moved through the corridors of the castle, his mind couldn't shake the weight of the words Alira had entrusted to him. The kingdom was in danger, and he was the one who had to act. For years, he had served King Edric with unwavering loyalty. He had been a knight in the king's guard for as long as he could remember, protecting the king's life, the royal family, and the entire realm from any harm. But the more Alaric thought about what the princess had said, the more he realized that the danger was already inside the walls of the castle. The kingdom was safe from outside threats, but what about the enemies within? The king's health was deteriorating, that much was clear. Edric's once sharp mind was clouded, his decisions growing more erratic with each passing day. The king was no longer the strong and wise ruler who had brought Eldoria to peace and prosperity. Instead, he was a man burdened by age and illness, unable to see the treachery growing around him. Alaric had always respected King Edric, but he couldn't ignore the fact that the king was no longer in full control. Lord Varick, one of the king's most trusted advisors, had been acting more strangely in recent months. He had been pushing for policies that seemed to favor his personal interests rather than the good of the kingdom. Alaric had noticed subtle changes. Varick's influence over the king had grown, and with it, his ambitions. It wasn't difficult to see that Varick was positioning himself to take power. As Alaric continued his patrols around the castle, he couldn't help but notice the strange looks exchanged between the nobles and courtiers. The whispers in the hallways had grown louder, and the once bustling and lively atmosphere of the court seemed to have shifted. People who had once been loyal to the crown now seemed uncertain, unsure of which side they should be on. The air in the castle had become thick with tension. One evening, as Alaric made his way through the royal library, he overheard a conversation between two of the king's senior advisors. He knew that they weren't aware of his presence, and for a moment he debated whether he should confront them or remain hidden. But curiosity got the better of him, and he leaned closer, careful not to make a sound. "I heard that Varric's plans are almost complete," one of the advisors said in a hushed voice. "He's got most of the council on his side now. It won't be long before he's in control." The second advisor nodded. "The king's health is worsening. It's only a matter of time before Varric takes the throne. The old man won't last much longer." Alaric's heart sank. He had suspected that Varric was ambitious, but hearing it spoken aloud made it all the more real. If what the advisors were saying was true, then the kingdom was on the verge of a crisis. Lord Varric was preparing to seize power, and the king, unable to see the danger, was powerless to stop it. After the conversation ended, Alaric quietly left the library, his mind racing. He had to tell Elira. She was the only one who could do something about this, but how could he approach her without alerting the wrong people? He knew that the more he dug into this conspiracy, the more dangerous it would become. Varric was no fool. He wouldn't hesitate to silence anyone who stood in his way. Alaric spent the next few days keeping a closer eye on the king's movements, trying to uncover more about Varric's plans. He had no solid evidence yet, but the pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place. He had noticed that the king seemed more and more isolated, relying heavily on Varric for advice. The once vibrant monarch now appeared frail and lost, as though he couldn't see the world around him clearly anymore. One evening, as Alaric stood guard near the king's chambers, he overheard a conversation between Varric and another nobleman. They were speaking in low voices, but Alaric caught enough of the exchange to understand the gravity of the situation. "Everything is in place," Varric said. "Once the king is out of the picture, the council will have no choice but to follow my lead. I'll be the one to take the throne, and no one will be able to stop me." The other nobleman chuckled. "And what of the princess? Will she not be a problem?" Varric's voice grew cold. "The princess is nothing more than a puppet in this game. Once I have control, she'll either fall in line or she'll be removed. It's not as if anyone will care what happens to her." Alaric's blood ran cold. It was worse than he had imagined. Varric wasn't just planning to take control of the throne. He was planning to eliminate anyone who stood in his way, including Princess Elira. Alaric had always believed that his duty was to protect the king, but now he knew that his true responsibility was to protect the kingdom itself, and the princess. He had taken an oath to defend the crown, but what good was that oath if the crown was being sold to the highest bidder? Varric's ambition was a threat not just to the monarchy, but to everything Alaric had sworn to protect. The king might be blind to the danger, but Alaric could no longer turn a blind eye. The next time he saw Elira, he could see the same worry in her eyes that he had seen in his own heart. She knew something was wrong, but she didn't know the full extent of it. And now neither did Alaric. All he had were suspicions, but the more he uncovered, the clearer it became that there was a conspiracy brewing within the castle walls. As he stood in front of her, he felt the weight of the promise he had made to her. He had sworn to protect her, and now it seemed as though that promise would be tested in ways he never imagined. "Your Highness," he began, his voice steady, though his mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. "I've learned things I wish I didn't have to say." Elira's face paled. "What is it, Alaric?" "The rumors are true," Alaric said. "There are those within the court who want to see your father's reign come to an end. Lord Varric is behind it all. He's manipulating the king, and he's planning to take the throne for himself. He has the support of most of the council, and he plans to eliminate anyone who stands in his way, including you." Elira's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. She had suspected something, but hearing the truth from Alaric made it all too real. "What can we do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "We have to act fast," Alaric replied. "The king is unaware, and if we don't stop this now, it will be too late." Alira nodded slowly. She knew that Alaric was right. The kingdom was slipping from their grasp, and it was up to them to fight back. But the question remained, how could they possibly stop such a powerful conspiracy? The castle was not the same anymore. Alaric could feel the change in the air. The once thriving halls were now filled with whispers, whispers that carried danger. The quiet tension had become suffocating, and every step he took inside the royal walls seemed heavier than the last. His promise to Princess Alira weighed on him more each day. His duty was clear: protect the princess, protect the kingdom. But how could he protect a realm when it was crumbling from the inside? Lord Varric's power had grown, and Alaric could see it everywhere. It was in the way the counselors spoke to the king, the way they hovered around him like vultures, pretending to offer counsel while, in reality, they were carving up pieces of the kingdom for themselves. Alaric had always known that politics was a dangerous game, but now it felt as though the very foundation of Eldoria was at risk of collapsing. He spent his days watching the king closely. King Edric was becoming more and more distant, his mind clouded by the sickness that seemed to have taken over him in recent months. Alaric could hardly remember the vibrant man he had once sworn to serve. Now Edric seemed lost, weak and unaware of the brewing storm in his own court. He had become a puppet, his strings pulled by Varric and the others who were ready to take everything the king had built for themselves. But what troubled Alaric most was not the king's decline, but the way his once steadfast loyalty to his monarch was beginning to falter. He had always believed in the crown. He had always been proud to serve the king. But now it was clear to him that the kingdom he had sworn to protect was under threat, not from invaders or foreign enemies, but from the very people who were supposed to protect it. One evening, Alaric walked through the corridors of the castle, lost in thought. He was on his way to the king's chambers where he had been assigned to keep watch, but as he passed a small side door he heard voices. They were soft at first, but then he caught a word that made him stop in his tracks. Varric. Alaric's instincts kicked in. He didn't recognize the voices, but it was clear that whoever they were talking about something important. He pressed himself against the wall, staying as quiet as possible. The voices grew louder, and he could make out snippets of conversation. "We can't wait any longer. The king is fading. It's time for Varric to take control. Are you sure the council will follow him? What if there's resistance?" "There will be no resistance. We've already secured their loyalty. When the time comes, the king will be out of the picture and Varric will step in. No one will question it." Alaric's blood ran cold. He had heard enough. The conspiracy was real. The king was truly in danger, and the ones who should be protecting him, his closest advisors, were the very ones plotting his downfall. Alaric couldn't stand there any longer. He had to warn Alira. He couldn't allow Varric to take the throne, especially not under these treacherous circumstances. He quickly made his way to the princess's chambers, his heart racing. When he arrived, the princess was sitting by her window, staring out at the castle grounds. She didn't seem to notice him at first, lost in her thoughts, but when she turned to face him, her expression shifted from worry to relief. "Alaric," she said softly, standing up. "You've come. What is it?" "Your Highness," Alaric began, his voice steady but urgent, "I've heard enough. There's no more doubt. Varric is planning to take control. He's not waiting for the king to die. He's manipulating the council and positioning himself to take the throne." I overheard the conversation myself. Alira's face paled, but she didn't look surprised. She had feared this moment for some time, but hearing the truth spoken aloud was another thing entirely. She walked slowly toward him, her gaze steady. "What can we do?" she asked, her voice calm but filled with resolve. "If he has the council on his side, how can we stop him?" Alaric hesitated. The answer was not simple, and the stakes were higher than ever before. I don't know yet, but we can't wait for him to make his move. We have to act now before it's too late. If Varric is allowed to take the throne, it will be the end of Eldoria as we know it. Elira nodded, her eyes burning with determination. Then we fight, but we cannot do this alone. Alaric knew she was right. The fight ahead would not be one they could win on their own. Varric had too many allies, too much power, but there were still those loyal to the crown, those who hadn't yet been corrupted by his influence. Alaric and Elira would need to rally those few remaining supporters if they were to stand a chance. We'll need to gather allies, Alaric said, his mind already racing through possibilities. We need to find those who still believe in the kingdom, in the true king's vision. But we'll have to be careful. Varric will be watching, and any misstep could be our undoing. Elira placed a hand on his arm, her voice steady. We'll be careful, Alaric, but we won't back down. The kingdom belongs to the people of Eldoria, not to one man. Alaric met her gaze, his heart swelling with admiration. He had always known that the princess was strong, but hearing her speak so boldly made him realize just how much she was willing to sacrifice for her people. She wasn't just a princess, she was a leader, a ruler in her own right. And with her determination, Alaric knew that they had a chance to save Eldoria, but the road ahead would be treacherous. They would have to act swiftly and decisively. And yet, even as Alaric made plans for the rebellion, he couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Every day that passed brought Varric closer to the throne. They had to move before it was too late. We need to gather those who are still loyal, Alaric repeated, his voice filled with urgency. We'll need to move quickly, and we'll need to be smart. The council's loyalty is already in question. If we can find a way to expose Varric's true intentions, we might be able to turn the tide in our favor. Elira gave a small nod, and for a moment they stood in silence, knowing that the path they were about to walk would be dangerous and filled with uncertainty. But Alaric had made a promise to her, and he would keep it. They would stop Varric, no matter the cost. As Alaric turned to leave the princess's chambers, he felt the weight of the journey ahead. It was no longer just about protecting a kingdom. It was about saving the future of Eldoria itself. And for that, he would fight with everything he had. The days following their conversation were filled with tension. Every decision felt heavy, every step weighed down by the ever-looming threat of Lord Varric's growing power. Sir Alaric and Princess Elira knew they had little time. The more they discussed their options, the more they realized just how close Varric was to taking control of the kingdom. The rebellion he was orchestrating was gaining strength, and it wouldn't be long before the court's loyalty was entirely secured. If they didn't act soon, it would be too late. They had agreed on a plan, but even as they prepared, doubt lingered. How could they fight back against an enemy who seemed to have already won the support of so many? Alaric couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the edge of a cliff, and one wrong move could send everything crashing down. But there was no turning back now. He had made a promise to protect the princess, and he would honor it, no matter the cost. Their first step was to find allies, those who had not yet been swayed by Varric's promises of power. It wouldn't be easy. The nobility in Eldoria was known for its shifting loyalties, and trust was a luxury they could not afford. But there were still those who believed in the true spirit of the kingdom, who valued honor over ambition, and they were the ones Alaric and Elira needed to find. They started with the old guard. Sir Aldric, a seasoned knight and one of the king's most trusted commanders, was a man of integrity. He had served with King Edric for many years and had never shown any signs of disloyalty. If anyone could be trusted, it was him. Elira had known him since she was a child, and she was hopeful that he would be willing to join their cause. Late one evening, as the moon hung low in the sky, Alaric and Elira made their way to Sir Aldric's chambers. The castle was quiet, the corridors dimly lit by the flickering torches along the walls. The sense of danger was palpable. Every shadow felt like it was hiding something. Every creak of the floorboard seemed like an alarm, signaling that their time was running out. When they arrived at Sir Aldrich's door, Alaric knocked softly. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing the old knight. His face was lined with age, but his eyes still carried the sharpness of a man who had seen countless battles. He was tall, with a presence that commanded respect, even in his later years. "Sir Alaric, Princess Elira," he greeted them with a respectful bow. "What brings you here at this hour?" Alaric glanced at Elira, and she stepped forward, her voice steady. "Sir Aldrich, we need your help. The kingdom is in danger. Lord Varric is preparing to seize control, and if we don't act, Eldoria will fall into his hands." The old knight's expression darkened as he listened. He had always been loyal to King Edric, but the growing unrest within the court had not escaped his notice. He had heard the rumors, the whispers that something was wrong, but he had hoped they were just idle gossip. Now, hearing Elira's words, he knew that the danger was real. "I feared as much," Sir Aldrich said quietly, rubbing his chin. "The king's health has been declining for some time, and I've seen how Varric has been maneuvering behind the scenes. He's always had ambition in his eyes, but I never imagined he would go this far." Elira's face was filled with determination as she spoke. "We can't allow him to take the throne. We need to gather those who are still loyal to the king, and together we'll fight back." Sir Aldrich looked at her, his eyes filled with both admiration and concern. "You've grown into a wise young woman, Princess. I always knew you had the strength to lead. But I must warn you, this will not be easy. Varric is not a man who will hesitate to destroy anyone who stands in his way. We're facing more than just a rebellion, we're facing a battle for the very soul of Eldoria." "I know," Elira replied, "but I have no choice. This is the only way to save the kingdom." After a long pause, Sir Aldrich nodded. "Very well, I will stand with you. I may be old, but I still know how to fight. If we are to stop Varric, we must act quickly and decisively. I'll gather those who are still loyal to the king, but we must be careful. Varric has eyes everywhere." Alaric felt a sense of relief wash over him. Sir Aldrich was a man of honor, and his support would be invaluable. But there was still much to be done. They needed more allies, and they needed a plan, one that would strike before Varric had a chance to secure his position as ruler. Over the next few days, Alaric and Elira continued to gather support, moving quietly through the castle and meeting with trusted allies in secret. They spoke to old knights, loyal courtiers, and even a few members of the royal family who had stayed out of Varric's reach. Each conversation was filled with uncertainty, but also hope. It was clear that there were still people who cared about the kingdom, who wanted to protect it from the threat Varric posed. But with each passing day, the danger grew. Varric's influence continued to spread, and his supporters grew bolder. Alaric could feel the tension in the air, and it was becoming harder to trust anyone. Even those who seemed loyal could be swayed by the promise of power. One evening, as Alaric and Elira stood in the royal gardens, watching the sunset, they discussed their next move. The kingdom's future rested on their shoulders, and the pressure was mounting. "We need to confront Varric," Alaric said, his voice firm. "We can't keep hiding in the shadows. We must make our move before he solidifies his control." Elira nodded, her face set in determination. "But we must be careful. Varric is a dangerous man. He won't hesitate to strike if he feels threatened." "I know," Alaric replied. "But we don't have the luxury of waiting any longer." As they spoke, they knew that the time had come to take a stand. They had gathered their allies, but now it was time for action. They would confront Varric, expose his treachery, and take back the throne that rightfully belonged to the king. The road ahead would be filled with danger and uncertainty, but Alaric was ready. For the kingdom, for the princess, and for the future of Eldoria, he would fight until the very end. The day of reckoning had arrived. The castle walls, which had once stood as a symbol of strength and unity, now seemed fragile, like they might crumble under the weight of the tension in the air. The rebellion that Sir Alaric and Princess Alira had feared was no longer just a whisper in the shadows. It was a storm, one that threatened to tear the kingdom apart. Alaric stood at the edge of the castle, gazing out over the lands he had sworn to protect. The landscape was beautiful, serene, and yet the calmness of the evening seemed like a false promise. He could feel the pressure of his duty pressing against him, the responsibility of keeping his word to the princess and to the kingdom. Everything they had fought for now depended on the next few hours. The plan was set in motion, but there was no guarantee it would work. Alira's confidence was unwavering, but even she knew that this battle was more than just one for the throne. It was a battle for their future. The stakes had never been higher. As much as he admired her courage, Alaric couldn't shake the feeling of uncertainty that clouded his thoughts. Could they really stop Varric? Could they turn the tide before it was too late? Alaric's hand tightened around the hilt of his sword as he turned away from the window. The time had come to face their enemies. Alira had gathered their allies, those who still believed in the true spirit of the kingdom. The plan was simple. They would confront Varric in the council chamber, expose his treachery, and demand that the throne be returned to its rightful heir. The council members would have no choice but to stand with them, or else be labeled traitors to the crown. But even the best-laid plans often go awry. As Alaric entered the royal hall, he found Alira already there, standing with the small group of trusted allies they had managed to rally. Her face was calm, but Alaric could see the determination in her eyes. She was ready. "We can do this," she whispered to him as he approached, her voice steady. "We'll take back what's ours." Alaric nodded, his heart racing. "We have no choice. We have to." The sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway, signaling the arrival of the council. Lord Varric, flanked by his loyal supporters, entered the hall, his expression one of feigned calmness. He was dressed in fine robes, his dark eyes scanning the room as though he already believed victory was within his grasp. "You've arrived just in time," Varric said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "The king is waiting for your report." Alira met his gaze without flinching. "No more reports, Lord Varric," she said, her voice sharp. "This ends today." Varric's smile faltered, but he quickly regained his composure. "What is this nonsense, princess? The king's health is fragile. We must be careful how we approach such matters." Alaric stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "The only matter that needs attention is your betrayal of the king and this kingdom. You've been manipulating the royal council and plotting to take the throne for yourself. It ends now, Varric." The room went silent, and for a moment it seemed as if time itself had stopped. Varric's eyes flickered with anger, but he quickly masked it with a cold, calculating expression. "How dare you accuse me of such things?" he spat, his voice rising. "I have always been loyal to the king and to this kingdom." But Alira was unyielding. "Your loyalty has always been to yourself, Lord Varric. You've used the king's illness to gain power. You've manipulated those around you, promising them rewards in exchange for their loyalty. But your plans end here." Varric's hand twitched, as if he were about to make a move, but he stopped himself. He knew better than to act rashly. Instead, he turned to the council members who had followed him into the room. "Are you all truly going to stand with this child?" he asked, his voice dripping with disdain. "Do you believe her lies over the stability I offer this kingdom?" One by one, the council members exchanged nervous glances, but no one spoke. The silence in the room was thick with tension. Varric's face reddened as he waited for someone, anyone, to speak in his defense, but none of them did. Then Sir Aldrich stepped forward. His presence was commanding, and he spoke with the weight of years of service to the crown. "We stand with Princess Alira," he said, his voice strong and unwavering. "The king may be ill, but his legacy is not one that can be easily replaced by someone like you, Varric. You've shown your true colors, and the council can no longer pretend to ignore your treachery." One by one, the other loyal members of the council stepped forward, their faces resolute. Varric's supporters were being picked off, their loyalties beginning to shift in Alira's favor. The tide was turning, but Varric was not done yet. "You think you've won?" Varric sneered, his voice cold. "You may have a few supporters, but you cannot take the throne from me. I will not be defeated so easily." Alira took a step forward, her eyes never leaving Varric's. "The throne is not yours to take. You never had the right. It belongs to the people of Eldoria, and it belongs to me as the rightful heir." There was a long, tense pause. For a moment it seemed as though Varric might strike out in fury, but instead he stood there, seething with rage, his plans unraveling before his eyes. His grip on power was slipping, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. "We will have no more of your lies," Alira continued, her voice strong. "We have the support of those who still care about this kingdom, and now we demand your resignation." Varric looked around the room, his eyes wild with desperation. He could see that he was losing, and the realization seemed to dawn on him slowly. The room was no longer his, and neither was the kingdom. "I will not leave," he hissed, his voice trembling with fury. "This is not over." But Alaric stepped forward, his eyes cold and unyielding. "It is over, Varric. You have lost." Varric took a step back, as if considering his options. But there was nothing left for him now. The council had turned, the people had spoken, and there was no more room for him in the halls of power. With a final glare at Alira and Alaric, Varric turned and stormed out of the room, his once grand plans crumbling to dust behind him. The moment he left, the tension in the room lifted. It was as if a heavy weight had been lifted from the castle. Alira and Alaric exchanged a brief look, their hearts still pounding from the confrontation. They had done it. Against all odds, they had stopped Varric from taking the throne, but their fight was far from over. The kingdom was still fragile, and the path ahead would be difficult. There were many challenges left to face, but for now they had won. Eldoria had been saved, and the princess had reclaimed her birthright. As Alaric stood by her side, he felt a sense of pride swell in his chest. He had kept his promise. He had protected the kingdom, and he had helped Alira reclaim her throne. But more than that, he had stood beside a leader who was brave, wise, and unwavering in the face of great danger. And for that, he was ready to face whatever came next.